Hi everyone, and welcome to part 2 of my video series on hidden secrets in Ableton Live. So in this part 2, I'm going to be talking about sampler, especially when it comes down to sculpting bass sounds and some of the creative possibilities that sampler can give us in terms of layering sounds together and creating larger than life sounds. And I honestly believe that sampler is potentially one of the most powerful instruments within the entire Ableton ecosystem, and I'm going to demonstrate that in a minute. But anyway, for those of you that this is the first video that you watch, my name is Hector. I produce under the alias of Hektagon, as you can see in the description below the video, and I've been producing for well over 30 years now, but I've been teaching as well music production with Ableton Live for the last 14 years, and here I am sharing my knowledge with the entire world. So anyway guys, I'm gonna crack on. I'm gonna start with the video. So quickly, as you can see here, I've got a project that basically I've got two versions of this project. One that's kind of like a drum bass of tempo. I've got a selection of sounds, of bass sounds here as well, which in all fairness, you can just type in the browser in Ableton, you can just go over to bass one shots, and that will give you quite a wide selection of samples that you would have in your computer that they're going to be usable, right? So you can see bass, and then you can go to one shot here, and then you can find a selection of sounds that are going to follow that, right? So that's really, really important. And then obviously you can go over to Ableton, and then you can just find anything that's like created by Ableton that is bass related. Okay, so very, very cool, because that's basically like an endless source of sounds that you can explore. I've got a selection here, as you can see. So I've got all these bass sounds I'm going to be using today. So I'm just quickly going to play. Just all these bass sounds are created just by adding modulation and also by stacking and layering bass sounds together. Okay, so this is one example, drum bass sort of sound. Okay, we're just turning that down a little bit so the levels are a little bit more balanced. This is another sample here. One thing about stacking bass sounds in Ableton, especially using sampler, is that you get this really nice kind of fullness. You know, think about it, like you could be using emulations of plugins like the Moog, etc., but you can also just find samples of the Moog oscillators and the simple waveforms and then blend them together. But not only that, we can even blend other sound sources on top of that. We can blend noise, or like a recording you made down the street of someone walking around, and just blend it into the bass, and you never know what you might get. So anyway, look, this is another one here. Again, this is kind of drum bass, but then I've got an example for slightly more sort of housey kind of flavors. There you go, right? This one here as well. For example, right, kind of ravey. So let's crack on with the tutorial. So I'm going to show you very quickly here. So what we're going to do, let me just delete that for now anyway. One thing I would suggest you guys when you edit sounds is to actually work from some kind of pattern, right? Because it's always really boring to sort of just like hit the keys on the keyboard and just see what happens, you know. But for now, I'm just going to go with the house, and then of course, if you, I don't know, you guys tell me in the comments if you prefer drum bass tutorials or house tutorials or whatever, or techno. But just for now, I'm just going to demonstrate it with this. So I've got a selection of bass sounds there, as you can see. That's one sound, another sound there. That's another kind of sound that's not really a bass, but I thought to maybe use that. Like a chord stab, another chord stab there. That's another stab, pure sine, like an 808 stab, which is pretty cool. So let's maybe start by exploring things a little bit. So I'm going to, again, just use this 808, drag it on over to the MIDI channel. Again, as we know, it creates an instance of sampler. If we right click on that, we can just turn it into sampler. Okay, so zooming back in, you can see that I can open the sound editor there, and then we can just drag and drop samples into it. So what I'm planning on doing is just going to be exploratory a little bit. This is, I know that is written on D, so it's always worth changing the root node to D just by clicking on the root and clicking up and down, or using the cursor keys, going up and down on the cursor keys. That also works quite well. Let's just play around with I'm just going to do like a kind of like long notes just to see what we can create. Maybe going up like that. I'm just exploring, you know, like nothing serious. It's just like a simple one bar. But let's hear that for a second, see if that actually makes sense. I'm just going to do this kind of repetition here. Just press play and just roll with that. There you go. Just keeping the kick quite clean there. So this is the bass that we have, but of course I already tuned it to D, so that's the B key, but I can potentially add another bass sound and I can just add it onto it. Remember that we can solo the bass sounds, so maybe I can just go a little bit further. I quite like that. So remember that is worth exploring. If you've got a sample that kind of changes in terms of like this movement on the filter, etc., it's worth just kind of like, you know, just sort of exploring the sample a little bit and just moving it. And of course we got the sustain mode, so potentially we don't even have to use the full sample, we can just use a snippet of the sample and just use that as a kind of like a sine, or like as a waveform really. And the way to do it, I think, is just by going to sustain mode, forward looping and clicking on link. So basically the start of the sample and the start of the loop are linked together, and then I can just go. I can even go as close as that. We can use the snap as well to make sure that Ableton lines up the start of the sample and the end of the sample properly, so there's no clicking and it sounds good. Quite cool as well. So remember that this is what's really interesting about sampling, is also like you can loop tiny sections, especially on like a bass sound from a synth. You can actually look at the waveform, and depending on where you move the loop, you're gonna get a completely different kind of sound, right? I quite like that. It's got like a nice overtoning there. Let's bring the other bass as well. Remember that we got control over the volume as well, so we can turn this one down if you want it. Right, and I can add something else if I want it. So let's just maybe find maybe another bass sound. Let's go down a little bit, see what we got in there. So I don't want another kind of like sine. I don't want to use a stab, I think. Let's just maybe try something else. That one has got a nice kind of like movement of the style. It's quite bright. Yeah, that's quite cool. All right, let's stop the original one so we can hear it. And again, we can explore it and we can move around the sample, right, as you know. Maybe I like that and I want to loop that section, just that, you know, only that particular section of the sample. So let me just move that a little bit so we can see better. Not stable because of the nature of the movement. You can see the waveform is changing quite a lot. Sometimes it's worth just kind of like, yeah, just go in and just loop like a little section. There you go. And now in theory we should have a collection of all the sounds playing at once. Turn it down a little bit. Alright, what else can we do? If we go over to the filter here, we can play around with the filter, of course, to get rid of the maybe like the high energy of the sound. We can use the more powerful filter types as well, like the MS-20, to give it a little bit more character. And we can even play around with plackiness if we want it, because of course we can play around with the envelope if we liked, but also we can play around with the filter envelope. So remember that the filter envelope, what's going to do is going to add movement to the filter frequency, right? And instead of the filter frequency being set to 285 Hertz, you can actually set that to move, right? So instead of being static, it can follow the movement of the filter envelope, the attack, decay, sustain, and release. And that can give us some really interesting things. Just for this demonstration, I'm going to open the release fully so it sounds cohesive, but you'll see what happens when I start dialing in the filter envelope amount. Nice, right? We can also add FM, and FM can be really interesting for bass sounds. I mean, I'm just going to play you what it sounds like without the filter. With the FM, we can get slightly more modern, slightly more dubstepy kind of sound, or more techno-y, abstract techno kind of sound, playing around with the volume of the oscillator. So let me just play that for you. Remember, the higher the volume, the brighter the modulation is going to be, the more intense the modulation is. And sometimes, if there's a lot of stacking, if there's a lot of sounds playing, you know, it can get a little bit crazy, right? It starts to sound like noise. And also you have to make sure that the samples are perfectly tuned. Otherwise the FM is just going to sound completely weird, right? But also it's worth exploring different QR settings. So sometimes for a bass, you can play with 1, that gives it like a nice kind of character. Or we can play with higher numbers. 2 is going to give you something that sounds more like a square wave. Or even higher. Or maybe you can go even below. It's kind of beefing up a little bit of the low end of the sound. And again, I'm going to just filter the sound a little bit. We can of course add the shaper if you wanted to add distortion. We can add a distortion prior to the filter or after the filter. Sometimes I like to explore after the filter to add a little bit of crunch. Maybe I don't like the sustain to be so long. There we go, right? And also, there's another thing that can be really powerful as well, is the fact that you can just change the sources whenever you feel like, right? So you can always just be like, okay, so which one is not working, or we can explore. So that's okay. That's okay. I'm not particularly mad with that sound. Let's just explore, maybe moving this. It's kind of like a wavetable synth, really, isn't it? Also, we're here in the FM. Maybe that's a little bit more stable. That's a nice 808 bass. And then we got the other sound that's a little bit more oppressive, but I like it. I don't know. We can sort of blend. And of course, you know, that's a simple bass line, but we can, that's the pad sound, but we can explore the bass sounds. For example, let's just play with that. Let's add a little bit of release so it sounds more natural. And we can quantize it, etc. Right? You get the idea. It's worth having something that you can sort of just have fun with. I mean, that was a quick, rough and ready sort of bass sound, or bass line, so to speak. Let's make that 3 voices. Remember that we got 3 samples, so we have to make it 3 voices, so we can hear all the samples. Let's move that maybe here, and that's maybe coming sooner. There we go. Let's move that here. Yeah, cool. And of course you can play around. There you go. Let's add some oscillators. Maybe that. I kind of prefer a little bit higher. Let's just go a little bit higher. Maybe shorten it. There you go, right? So that's one aspect that can be quite creative, just by layering samples together. And you can even, I don't know, you can explore maybe adding something else. There's a stab, let's add it in there. That's a stab on G minor. So let's just, I don't know, let's tune it to G. Hopefully that should work. So let's go into G. So that's the stab. Not sure if that's doing the... What if we make it a little bit higher? Let's just go and make it much lower in there. Maybe lower. Yeah, so that's adding that on top of the bass. Turn it off. Subtle, but I like it. Let's open the, let's turn down the shaper. And let's open the filter even further. There you go. There you go, and already kind of bouncing a little bit, right? So you get the idea. Another aspect that is not talked about enough as well is this. I'm just quickly going to show you. Look, let's say, for example, I take something, and it doesn't really matter what synth. I mean, let's just say I'm going to take, let's take wavetable, just to demonstrate one little thing here. So let's say I take wavetable, and let's say I go into wavetable, and maybe use a sawtooth, which is what we're hearing there, and I'm going to use maybe the classic mode. I'm going to add more voices. And I'm going to just like do like a long note for C, maybe like a little bit lower. There, so it's kind of like a Res sound, right? Like the typical kind of Res. I'm gonna maybe like do it 2 bars in length, so I've got plenty of sample to work with, if that makes sense. So let's delete that, and then you can see one thing that is gonna be really, really useful. So now in Ableton, what we can do is we can right click, and we can say, okay, can you bounce track in place? So now we've got the sample, and this basically means that I can then now take that sample that I recorded from wavetable, and I can potentially just add it. But there's one more thing I wanted to just quickly show you. We got that sound. I'm going to put raw, and I'm going to take raw and just give the sound like even more dirt, right? So let's just do it so you can hear it. Look, let's bring a lot of the mids and maybe add a little bit of fizz on the highs. Let's just bring that up. And a little bit of crunch maybe on the lows. Let me just take the tube, maybe that would give it a nice. Right, I like that. That sounds really fat. So this is actually raw, and I can imprint that sound back into the audio, right? Bounce track in place. There you go. So now that includes raw as well. So this is something else that is not sort of apparent, but that can be really cool. Put that into sampler. You can see it's quite chunky, right? And let's just transfer that to sampler here. And now I can take that, and I can be like, cool, that's going to be like a nice sort of Res. It's got a little bit higher, obviously. I can duplicate it. Right, I can create instances of that, and that could also be like adding more voices, right? So you remember that each one of these copies that I just made, I can actually detune, right? So look, that's cool. We can do +9. Let's go to -9 so it sounds balanced. So that's cool. If I don't want to have that kind of phasing effect, this is because all the samples start at the same point. And yeah, they all have got a little bit of, the drifting pitch, right? So you get this kind of like phasing, which can be cool for drum bass. Like if you want to do some crazy stuff, of course, be my guest. You can do like whatever. You can go here, filter the sound, and then do like some crazy wobbles. Right, you get the idea. Like, let's just speed it up to drum bass. Why not? Look, let me demonstrate that for you. So, all right, there we go. Right, let's have a listen. So this is the bass. So let's hear it. I'm going to just play along. Right, so that's the basics. But I can add something else on top of this, right? So remember that we have that really lovely 808 sound. So let's add it. That's on D, so remember that we have to tune it, okay? Sample, and then tune that one to D. Remember, you can select the samples by clicking here, right? And you can also just click here and select them, okay? So this one is supposed to be in D, that's why it sounds off. So let's move that to D. There we go. And I can even pan the tune copies. I don't know, that's the tune to the, I don't know if it's going to make a huge difference, but you can do that as well. Look. Let's add a little bit of drive. And this is another trick I like to do, which is a low fan. So you see that we got this LFO1, and that movement, it's a bit boring, right? Of course, FM, right? This is another thing. Like, we can't add FM, and that could really, really change the sound. Remember, this is highly filtered, but let's have a listen. Look, I'm going to open it. Obviously, it's quite full. Let's maybe go number 2. No, I think it was better than 1, maybe 0.5. Yeah, and another thing that we can do is we can, you know, make the FM to come in gradually if you want it, right? So it just gives it a little bit of movement. That's better and not so strong. Let's just dial it down. All right, and then let's bring back the filter, and this is a little trick I like to do, which is pretty cool. Let me show you. So I find that movement is a little bit boring. So one thing that I can do is I can delay the LFO a little bit. So it comes in late. But I don't want the LFO to just be static. That rate's a bit boring. So what I tend to do is I take another LFO and I modulate the rate of that one, which is another thing that's insanely powerful within Sampler, right? So let's go on LFO1 rate, right? So that's modulated by LFO2. And let's dial in the amount and let's explore it. I don't know. Yeah, that's cool, right? And I don't know, I can try to add another step sound on top. That's on E, so let's, I don't know if that's even, I don't know, let's explore it. And also have that other sort of, yeah, it's maybe not, we got that echo, right? That bell kind of sound, this one. So that can be quite cool. That's, I don't know if that's in key, but remember, it does make a difference, right? If I solo just this, that's the original sound, and you can see as I solo each, still sounds quite thin, right? Look. And then, already, and that one. Massive sound. There you go, right? And of course I can apply shaping, whatever, you know, you get the idea. I can just like say, okay, cool, I want to add distortion afterwards, etc. Right? So this is another concept there that can become quite interesting too. And of course you can get really mad with modulation, and you can get really abstract as well with the different filter types. You don't have to use that. Sometimes I even use a notch filter instead, like the OSR, to give it like a little bit of like a kind of neuro kind of sound. And then you can be like, also you can even modulate the volume for cleanness, right? So it sounds a little bit cleaner. Maybe the filter is not going to be modulated as much. Let's move it a little bit higher. There you go. So it's kind of like a phaser, really, when you play around with the notch. Amazing. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial. I just wanted to sort of like demystify a little bit of the things within Sampler, and I haven't really touched the surface. Obviously, it's just a quick tutorial just to demonstrate some concepts, but I thought I'd share that with you guys, and I hope you guys enjoyed it. As always, please subscribe if you haven't done so yet, and if you, I don't know, if you like the video, leave me a comment as well. Tell me what you think about the video. And yeah, or any questions, of course, feel free to get in touch. All right, so take care, guys. Thank you so much for watching, and see you soon.